Have you ever stared into the face of someone who shares your blood and understood with absolute clarity that you'd become nothing but a problem to solve? $32. That was everything I had, while November rain cut through my jacket like it wasn't even there. I hadn't blown it on vices. My shoulder tore at the factory, cost me my job, and my older brother Derek decided that made me dead weight. Before that day ended, I'd wager my last $30 on a corroded storage unit and crack open a $4 million secret that would shatter every lie he'd ever told. But in that moment, I was just a man with nothing, gripping a black trash bag. __quote, _0__. Derek stood in the doorway of the house where we both grew up. The house our mother left to both of us. Somehow, he'd maneuvered himself into position as sole executor of her estate. He wouldn't look at me. Brenda hovered behind him, arms folded, wearing that particular expression, half pity, half irritation. Quote 1, I said. Rain hammered the porch's tin roof so hard I could barely hear my own voice. 1 more month. That's all I need to get steady again. You've been saying that for a year. His jaw locked tight. Your room's already rented. New tenant arrives tomorrow. Your things are packed. One boot shoved a bulging industrial trash bag across the threshold toward me. 30 years of being brothers, wiped out by some overdue utility bills and a medical expense I couldn't cover. My fists were clenched so hard my knuckles ached. I didn't swing. I bent down, hauled that bag onto my good shoulder, and walked off the driveway without turning around. 3 miles I trudged along the shoulder of Route 8. Cars blew past, kicking freezing slush onto my jeans. I found shelter under the faded awning of a closed-down diner. Dropped my bag on the gritty concrete. My hands shook as I dug into a soaked pocket to take inventory. A wrinkled 20, a 10, 2 singles, $32, the complete sum of my existence. Not enough for a motel, not enough for a bus ticket to anywhere that mattered. I stood there studying that damp money, doing arithmetic on how many days of dollar menu meals it could buy. Then a bright neon orange sign across the 4-lane highway grabbed my eye. Secure all storage. Public auction today, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I checked my phone. Cracked screen, but the numbers were clear. 1:45 p.m. Sure, I'd watched those storage auction shows on TV, loud personalities popping open units to find safes packed with gold, rare collectibles. I also knew the truth. Most abandoned units held stained mattresses, broken Christmas ornaments, and the sad debris of lives that fell apart. But desperation does something strange to your logic. The alternative was sitting under that awning with $32, waiting for the cold to finish what Derek started. I needed something, a distraction, a long shot. I crossed that highway, barely dodging a semi doing 60, and dragged my trash bag through the gates of Secure All Storage. Not much of a crowd, maybe 10 people clustered under umbrellas, following a heavy-set man with a clipboard and a voice that carried like a cannon. Jim Lawson, local auctioneer, known for his speed and his zero tolerance for wasted time. All right, folks, listen up, Jim barked, swiping rain off his forehead. Standard rules. Door goes up, you look from the threshold. Don't cross the line. Don't touch a thing. Cash only, due on the spot. You buy it, you haul it out by tomorrow sundown. Let's move to Unit 114. I drifted to the back of the group. These were regulars, you could tell. Greg Miller was there, pawn shop owner with a reputation for ruthlessness, standing in a leather duster, gnawing a wet, unlit cigar. Beatrice, the antique dealer with eyes that missed nothing. A handful of scrap metal guys hunting cheap copper and old appliances. Unit 114 rolled open. Inside sat a pristine leather sectional, multiple flat-screen televisions, and rows of plastic bins arranged with almost surgical precision. Bidding opened at $200 and shot to $800 within seconds. Greg Miller claimed the prize, wearing that smug grin of his. Unit 128 went for $400. Unit 205 sold at $650. Every padlock Jim cracked open chipped away another piece of my hope. I was a trespasser at a rich man's table. My $32 meant nothing here. By the time we reached the back section of the facility, the oldest stretch, where corrugated metal roofs wore thick stains of rust, the crowd had thinned considerably. Rain came down harder. The cold deepened. __quote_7__. Jim sighed, guiding us toward Unit 402. Orange paint curled away from the door in long, brittle strips. __quote_8__. Jim nodded to the facility manager, who stepped forward with heavy bolt cutters and bit through the rusted padlock. It broke with a sharp crack. Jim grabbed the handle and heaved the metal door upward. It screamed against its tracks, raining down flakes of rust. The smell hit us instantly. A choking wave of mildew, rotting cardboard, and stale earth. Several people in the group physically stepped back. Greg Miller aimed his industrial flashlight into the darkness and barked out a laugh. The place was a catastrophe. Junk packed wall to wall with no logic or mercy. A mangled bicycle frame, rusted beyond recognition. Stacks of cardboard boxes collapsed from a roof leak, soaked through and shapeless. A gutted futon mattress, hemorrhaging yellow stuffing. And beneath all of it, debris upon debris upon debris. No furniture outlines, no plastic bins, just waterlogged wreckage. Greg scoffed, turning his back on the unit. Beatrice didn't even reach for her flashlight. She shook her head and started walking toward her van. All right, don't everyone rush at once," Jim said dryly. "Somebody give me $50. 50 for the entire lot. Do I hear 50? Nothing. Just the steady drumming of rain on asphalt. Come on, people, I need this unit cleared. $30, give me 30. There's got to be some scrap metal buried in there. $30. My hand drifted toward my pocket on its own. Fingers found the crumpled 20 and the 10. If I bought this, I'd have $2 left. $2. But standing there, staring into that dark, waterlogged mouth of Unit 402, something electric ran through me. Not the wind, something deeper, something animal. A pull from somewhere below thought. Call it instinct. Call it the recklessness of a man who has already lost everything there is to lose. Before logic could catch up, my voice cut through the rain. __quote_14__. Every remaining head turned. Greg Miller stopped mid-step and looked me over. The soaked clothes, the grey skin, the black trash bags slumped at my feet. He let out a low, pitying laugh. __quote_15___. Greg muttered, yanking his collar up as he walked away. Jim Lawson studied me with something between surprise and sorrow. __quote_16___. I walked up to Jim on legs I could barely feel. My hands shook violently as I fished the damp bills from my pocket. 120, 110. I placed them in his palm. Jim handed me a receipt and a fresh padlock to secure the door until I could haul everything out. Quote 17, he said quietly, his eyes catching my shivering. Quote 18. Quote 19, I whispered. Jim climbed into his truck and pulled away. And then, the full weight of what I'd done crashed into me. I stood alone in the freezing rain, staring into a 10x10 metal box stuffed with rotting garbage. I had just spent my last shred of security on another person's abandoned refuse. My knees buckled. I hit the wet asphalt, pressed my face into my hands, and let out a sound that barely qualified as human. A broken, wretched sob. I don't know how long I stayed there on that cold pavement. Eventually, the sheer, biting cold forced me upright. The storage facility stood nearly empty now. Main gates, locked to all incoming traffic. Only a pedestrian exit still open. That overcast afternoon had thickened into something heavier, a darkness with weight to it. I hauled my trash bag into the unit, keeping it clear of the rain, then yanked the rolling door halfway down as a windbreak. Inside, absolute blackness. I fished out my phone, fired up the flashlight app, balanced it on an overturned chair. Its pale beam cut across the chaos. "All right, Caleb," I whispered, breath hanging white in the frozen air. "Let's see what $30 buys." I started at the front, pulling ruined items out one at a time. The labor kept me warm, but every object I removed sank my hope a little deeper. The cardboard boxes had practically dissolved. When I tried lifting them, the bottoms gave way, dumping heaps of moldy magazines across the concrete. National Geographics from the 1980s, fused together by water damage, completely worthless. Then came the futon mattress, impossibly heavy, bloated from years of roof leaks. I wrestled it toward the threshold, gasping. My bad shoulder screamed with that sharp, familiar ache. By 10 o'clock at night, I'd cleared the front half of the unit. The refuse sat in a massive pile just outside the door. I was destroyed. Starving, filthy, coated in dust and black mold spores. My phone battery, down to 15%. I dropped onto an overturned plastic bucket and stared at what remained. The back half was draped beneath a large, heavy-duty canvas tarp. Military-grade material, thick and rigid, buried under years of dust. But it had done its job. Whatever it covered had been shielded from the water damage that gutted everything up front. I grabbed the stiff edge of the fabric, one hard pull. Dust exploded into the air, and I doubled over, coughing. When it cleared, I aimed my dying phone light toward the back wall. And there, untouched by the rot surrounding it, sat a stack of 5 heavy, dull, grey metal bars. Each one roughly the size of a standard brick, but coated in cheap matte grey primer that flaked at the edges. They were propping up a massive antique steamer trunk. The trunk was stunning, completely out of place in this graveyard of forgotten things. Dark mahogany, reinforced with heavy brass corner pieces and dual iron lock clasps. Leather straps across the top, dry, cracked, but holding. Dead center, a tarnished brass plate was fixed to the wood, engraved in ornate cursive, E. H. Sterling. My heart stuttered. Sterling. I'd lived in Akron my entire life. Anyone who knew Rust Belt history knew that name. Elijah H. Sterling, an industrial titan of the 1920s, a man who owned half the steel mills in the state before his family's empire collapsed under mysterious circumstances in the 1970s. Local rumors had persisted for decades. The fortune hadn't been lost to bad investments. It had been hidden away by a paranoid heir. But that was just lore. Surely this was nothing more than an antique piece of furniture. I knelt before the trunk, reached for one of the grey metal bars underneath, meaning to shift it aside. The instant my fingers closed and I pulled, my arm wrenched downward. I gasped. The bar struck concrete with a deafening clang that rang through the empty facility. Impossibly heavy, far beyond iron or steel. My mind snapped back to high school chemistry, density calculations. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver I'd found earlier in the trash and scraped it hard across the peeling grey surface. The primer chipped away instantly. And underneath, catching the last fading beam of my phone's light, a bright, unmistakable, buttery gleam. Not silver. Gold. My breath locked in my chest. I scraped harder, tearing strips of grey paint away in ragged curls. Stamped into the gleaming metal beneath, Credit Suisse, 400 ounces, fine gold, 999.9. The exact spot price of gold escaped me in that moment, but I knew it hovered somewhere around $2,000 an ounce. My mind stalled trying to do the math. Over $800,000 in a single bar. 5 of them lay on that concrete floor. I lurched backward, scrambling away like the things might burn me. My lungs locked. Air wouldn't come. More than $4 million in solid gold bullion, sitting in a storage unit I'd bought for $30. Somebody had coated them grey to look like industrial scrap, buried them under a pile of worthless junk, hidden in plain sight. But why? Who had left them here? My eyes drifted upward from the gold to the mahogany trunk the bars had been propping up. If $4 million in bullion was just a stand, what was inside that box? I dragged myself toward the trunk on hands and knees. My fingers shook so badly the flashlight beam danced across the walls. 2 iron clasps held the lid shut, each fitted with heavy brass keyholes, old ones, ornate. I had no key. I grabbed a rusted tire iron I'd pulled from the wrecked bicycle earlier, jammed the flat end under the right clasp, threw every pound I had onto the bar. The old wood moaned, then a sharp crack, and the screws ripped free from the mahogany. I did the same on the left side, tearing my knuckles open on the brass edge in the process. Didn't feel a thing. I threw the tire iron aside, drew one long breath, pushed the heavy domed lid open. Cedar, aged paper, machine oil. The smell rose like something unsealed after decades. The interior was bone dry, lined in red velvet, still pristine. 3 items rested on that velvet: a thick ledger bound in leather, a heavy canvas bank bag crimped shut with a lead seal, and a plain manila envelope. I went for the ledger first, cracked the stiff cover open. Page after page of handwritten accounting stretching back to 1982. But this wasn't any company's books. Names, dates, dollar amounts, each entry labeled with a single word. Quote 22. I started reading the names. The blood left my face. The former chief of police, the last 2 mayors of Akron, state judges, a real estate developer who currently owned half the downtown district, and there, page 3, next to a $50,000 cash payout dated 1985, a name I knew better than my own: Arthur Mercer, my father, a low-level city inspector who died 10 years ago and left behind nothing but debt and a small house. Yet this ledger said he'd been collecting substantial, off-the-books payments from the Sterling family for an entire decade. My phone buzzed hard in my pocket, so sudden I flinched and dropped the ledger. Battery warning, 5%. I grabbed the manila envelope, ripped it open, 1 typed sheet of paper, 1 black and white photograph. The photo showed my father, much younger, standing right in front of this storage facility, shaking hands with a man I'd never seen before. The typed letter bore a date, the 14th of October, 1999. It read, quote, 23. I read those words again, and again, until the letters dissolved into shapes without meaning. Derek, the brother who had just thrown me out into the rain, the brother who swore our parents died with nothing. He didn't know. Derek had never come for the unit. He must have lost the paperwork, or maybe he figured the whole thing got auctioned off years ago when the payments lapsed. He'd walked away from his hidden fortune, and through some cruel joke of the universe, I just bought it back with my last $30. Then, outside the rolling metal door, tires ground slow and heavy across wet gravel. Headlights sliced through the gap at the bottom, throwing long shadows over the gold bars. A car door slammed shut. Heavy footsteps slapped through standing water, moving with purpose toward Unit 402. "Hey, anyone in there?" Greg Miller's rough voice cut through the downpour. I killed the flashlight. Total darkness swallowed me whole. My heart slammed against my ribs, frantic, caged. Outside, those heavy boots crunched closer across soaked gravel. They stopped right at the half-rolled corrugated door. Greg Miller's voice bounced off the damp walls. "I know you're inside. Roll it up." Panic flooded my chest like ice water. I jammed the manila envelope and the leather-bound ledger deep into the inner pocket of my drenched denim jacket. Moving fast but silent, I seized the heavy military canvas tarp and flung it back over the mahogany trunk, over the 5 gold bars. I pressed the fabric flat, praying that thick canvas would hide the unmistakable outline of a multi-million-dollar fortune. 20 minutes later, we made our way to the back of the unit. I scraped the grey primer off the nearest bar. Underneath, flawless, buttery gold. Tom actually stumbled backward. "Caleb, is that 400 ounces?" His voice barely a whisper. "Each bar. And the trunk holds evidence that will put my brother in federal prison." Tom's face went stone cold. We loaded everything in terrified silence, winching the trunk and the bullion onto the flatbed, burying it all beneath a rusted washing machine Tom already had in the back. By 2 in the morning, Unit 402 sat locked with my padlock. Nothing inside but rotting garbage. Meanwhile, millions in gold rolled quietly into the darkness. Next morning, I was sitting in the cramped, windowless office at Tom's salvage yard. 5 gold bars lined his steel workbench, every trace of grey primer stripped clean. Under the harsh fluorescent tubes, they looked alien, wrong, glowing against greasy wrenches and bald, spare tires. Across from the gold sat David Horowitz, federal prosecutor. Tom knew him through old family ties. David was precise, surgical. He'd spent the last 3 hours dissecting every page of the leather-bound ledger and the typed letter. 29, he said, finally. He looked up and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. 30. 31, I said. My voice had no warmth in it. 32. David tapped his pen against the ledger. 33. He paused. 34. 35, I shot back, leaning in. 36. 37, David cautioned. Tom cut in from behind me, arms crossed. In return, the FBI recognizes Caleb as a good-faith purchaser and confidential informant. He turns over the gold. But you authorize the standard 20% informant and finder's share from the seized assets. That's my price for the ledger, I said. Steady, calm. David reached his hand across the table. Slowly. Deal. But first, we need to catch your brother in the act. Prove he orchestrated the proxy bid. My new prepaid phone buzzed to life. The screen read, Derek. I answered and hit speaker. Caleb? Derek's voice came through tight, wound with panic, but forcing casual. Badly. Look, I caught wind of a strange rumor that you picked up an old storage unit on Route 8 yesterday. Unit 402. That true? I glanced at David. He gave me a solid nod. Yes, paid $30 for it. Nothing but junk inside. Planning to head over in about an hour and haul everything out. Wait! Derek nearly shouted the word. Don't throw anything away. I used to rent that unit. There are family keepsakes in there, things that matter to me. I'll hand you $5,000 cash for that lock key right now. We can meet at the restaurant across the highway. 10,000, I said. Flat. No feeling in my voice at all. Bring it in a briefcase. Done, Derek answered without hesitation. 1 hour later, I sat in a booth at the diner across from Secure All Storage. Derek walked in looking rattled. He dropped into the seat and shoved a fat manila envelope toward me. 10 grand. Hand over the key, Caleb. I didn't touch the envelope. Instead, I reached inside my jacket, pulled out a photocopy of that typed letter from the trunk, and slid it across the table. Derek looked down. The moment his own name registered, every trace of color abandoned his face. That polished confidence, gone. You sold me out for a payday, I said, barely above a whisper. You wanted me sidelined so you could collect father's dirty money without me asking questions. Caleb, please, Derek stuttered. His hands were shaking. We can split it. We're brothers. We were brothers yesterday, I said, standing up from the booth. When I was standing in the rain. I walked out of that diner without the money. The second I pushed through the glass doors, 3 unmarked black SUVs swept into the parking lot. Federal agents poured out and stormed the building to take him into custody. I pulled my collar tight against the cutting wind and headed for Tom's truck, leaving every piece of my old life behind. I walked away from that storage unit with more than a fortune. I walked away with my dignity intact. Derek lost the house to legal fees. The crooked politicians caught federal indictments. Now I live in a small farmhouse in Medina. Quiet life. Sometimes the lowest point becomes the only foundation solid enough to rebuild on. $30 bought me a genuine new beginning. I will never look back.